the panel on legal wrappers and try like helping DAOs figure out the legal side. So I called the panel Legalizing DAOs, and then I received criticism that it's not really legalizing DAOs because DAOs aren't illegal, and it's more about figuring out like how to approach these different legal issues, how to manage risk around your DAO, and yeah, basically something that a lot of DAOs have been neglecting and postponing. And I hope this session can help demystify the whole thing. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it to the panel. So it will be Adam Miller from MIDAO, Paolo Gang from LexDAO, and Ramona from Ixian. And yeah, thank you for your patience. The floor is yours. Whoever wants to go first, please. We can start with a short round of introductions.
Thank you. Sounds good. Yeah. So do you guys see the agenda that I put up?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. So what we're going to talk about today is, yes, the core issue of legal entities for DAOs, which is often a whole multi-hour session in and of itself, but also try to touch on some specific jurisdictions for those legal entities, as well as some other legal issues for DAOs. So I'll talk about DAO governing documents. Ramona will talk about DAO risk management in general, and Paolo will talk about DAO compliance in general, even as it goes beyond legal entities for DAOs. To Pet's point, why don't we do quick intros? Ramona and then Paolo, you want to give a quick intro to yourself, and then I'll dive into an intro to myself, and I'll do my part of the talk.
Thank you, Adam. So hi, everyone. My name is Ramona. I'm a multi-jurisdictional attorney, and then I ended up in the Cayman Islands 8 years ago and started to work in investment funds, and then dove deep into digital assets like about 4 years ago when I started my own company. And then I went from, I could project consult for this. I was like, I could build this, and diving deeper and deeper. Right now, I'm doing risk strategy and governance for centralized and decentralized projects, and trying to figure out the problem of how to link these two realities together, right? The DAO ethos and how it works, and with the legal structures that we currently have and have to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meet you, everyone. Thanks for having me here. My name is Paolo. I'm a lawyer from Italy. I have a background in tech law, privacy, IP. Generally speaking, I entered into the crypto sector 4 years ago. I used to see always as an NFT collector. Basically, that was my point of entry into the crypto space. Now I have besides my Italian clients, I have a number of I would say international crypto clients. Some of them are DAOs. I'm a member of LexDAO, like Ramona in any case as well. But I have I would say a fair considerable experience with decentralized clients in a number of issues, like helping them to create legal entities or legal structures, putting together the compliance systems and other, and also have some experience in litigation for some decentralized entities. So that's me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Let me get my screen sharing going again here. And just a little bit about myself. Do you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. So I've worked in, I was a programmer, and then I was in Web 1 and Web 2. I spent time in corporate America before leaving Capital Group to get into Web 3 as a DAO technology provider. And I just want to tell the story of how I got from building technology for DAOs to working on MIDAO, which is the company I run, stands for Marshall Islands DAO, and we're in the legal entity business for DAOs. So it all goes back to about 3 years ago. One of the DAOs I was building technology for, and I'm going to start my timer because I'm also the moderator here, and try to make sure each of us does about 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll take a few minutes of Q&A. The DAO I was working for was offered $1 million grant from the Moonbeam Ecosystem Fund. And Moonbeam said, to accept this grant, you need to sign the grant agreement, which means you need a legal entity for your DAO. And by now, a lot of people watching have probably run into the same problem. which is you're offered a grant by Arbitrum or Optimism, whoever, and they say, okay, now you need to fill out this form. And you need a legal entity, possibly a nonprofit legal entity, to accept this grant. And so we looked around the world, and we looked at Delaware and Cayman Islands and Switzerland and other popular spots, and saw that there were some things that we wish were different about all the legal entities in the world. And we reached out to a jurisdiction called the Marshall Islands, which is a former U.S. territory. It's a sovereign nation in the South Pacific. And we saw that they were a leading jurisdiction in the shipping industry. And so we reached out to a senator there and we said, hey, DAOs are kind of like ships. They don't live in any one place. They're kind of everywhere and nowhere at the same time. How would you like to expand your country's expertise from shipping into DAOs and Web3? And so this led to a partnership where over the past 3 years, we've written and passed 3 laws. I'm not a lawyer. And by the way, I skipped the disclaimer slide, but none of this is legal advice, right? We're not your lawyers. You've got to contract with a lawyer directly for legal advice. I'm not even a lawyer. They are. I'm not a lawyer, but I've ended up writing laws that have passed in this country and become the CEO of a legal services business. What MIDAO does, aside from collaborating with the government on these laws, which are written for DAOs and Web3, is we're their partner that acts as the registered agent, so that if anyone wants to set up one of these legal entities for DAOs, they can come work with us to produce the documents that need to be produced. We can get them connected with lawyers all over the world, including in the Marshall Islands as needed, and then help them form their legal entity, which is a DAO LLC. The deficits that we saw in other jurisdictions were things like that we didn't want to have a management team. We wanted to be a DAO where the token holders were directly in control of the legal entity with no board, no officers, no managers, no directors. Right. And virtually and no supervisors, which is actually an interesting and modern concept we might talk about a little bit later. But, we said we want to have a managerless organization. And so that's what we wrote a law that creates. We also said we want to have anonymous members. We want all of our token holders to be members just by virtue of holding the token and actually have governance rights over the legal entity. And so we wrote laws to create an entity that provides that as well. So there are other things I'll get into a little bit later, but that was kind of the inspiration for the work that we've done in writing these laws. I want to take one step back before getting a little deeper into the legal issues, which is to say, from what I consider to be a legal perspective, what is a DAO? And it's not as much about operating in a totally like open, permissionless, inclusive way, even though those things are amazing and DAOs make it easier in some ways to do those things. But to me, what makes DAOs legally different from traditional organizations is that they are using the blockchain to track their members, to do their governance, right, by doing votes on chain, often to control a treasury on chain, and often to control software on chain directly through governance. These are the things that make DAOs conflict with the way existing laws were written in most of the world, right? Most laws assume that you know who your members are, their names and addresses, that you have managers, right? That you're maybe tracking things on paper and written documents. And so these are the things that to me make DAOs, primarily different from traditional organizations. So I'm not going to get into this slide in detail. I think most people here and from all the talks are pretty familiar with what DAOs are. But again, to me, it's looking at a traditional organization does something like membership tracking in a shareholder registry. A DAO does it with a token, most likely, or some kind of smart contract. And just to briefly summarize, what's so exciting about this to me is not that it enables for like governance of protocols. That is amazing. And that's what most DAOs probably do today. It's that any organization now has a way to do things in a much more compliant, transparent, and scalable way in terms of their governance. Right? We're automating part of an organization, the governance part in particular, that was unautomatable before. That we had even the biggest companies in the world, public companies, doing multi-million-dollar projects just to hold a vote and spending millions of dollars a year just to track who their members are, right? And when you hold a vote, by the way, of the shareholders, it takes 3 months. And there's an in-person part, there's an email part, there's a postal mail part, there's a verbal mail part. Well, suddenly we have a way to do this digitally. And so now it's as easy to create an organization as it is to create a website. And they can scale as fast as you can scale a website in the cloud. So that's what's so exciting to me. So I think in 5 or 10 years, not only will maybe half of traditional organizations use the technology we're building in the DAO space, but we'll also have organizations in places where we didn't have them before, just like we have websites in places where we didn't have brick and mortar businesses before, right? When you like grossly reduce the friction and cost of doing something, people will do it in situations where they did not do it before. Okay, that said, that's the exciting part in terms of DAOs. Let's take a step back at some unique legal issues for DAOs. I'm not going to talk about all of these on the slide. In fact, this is kind of just a list of most of the legal issues that anybody faces with a business or an organization. And most of them have a component that's different for DAOs, right? And the three of us on the stage talk about all of these issues, I'm sure, on a regular basis. Just to give one example, let's say we're talking about banking for DAOs. That's barely even a legal issue. I mean, the fact is that companies often ask their lawyers for help getting bank accounts. But just the fact that you might not have any managers, and the first thing a bank will ask you when you apply for a bank account is, please list your managers on Exhibit A or page 2 of the application, and you have to email them back and say, wait a second, we don't have managers, right? So and so then they're going to want to, there's a whole nother level of due diligence they're going to want to do if they're even still willing to talk to you. And realistically, it is a legal adjacent issue, because the things that the bank is concerned with, risk management and compliance, end up being legal issues and connect to the legal structure of your DAO. That said, what I'm going to talk about for the next little less than 10 minutes now is DAOs without legal entities, the importance of legal entities, what legal entities are, and a little bit into governing documents like bylaws and operating agreements, et cetera, and how they apply even when you don't have a legal entity too. So let's just touch for a second, and this is on the agenda for each of us, because I think we all want to collectively drive home the risk of operating a DAO without a legal entity. And this is something that even from 3 years ago, when I got into DAOs professionally, already any lawyer that was familiar with DAOs, that to my knowledge, already agreed that you probably need one or more legal entities for your DAO. And the reason for that is that it's not like we all get to choose whether or not we have a legal entity. It's we get to choose whether we want to choose our own, like, for example, choosing a foundation in the Cayman Islands, or whether the governments of the world are going to assign you the default legal entity, which is often going to be the worst legal entity for any business, and that's a general partnership. It may have slightly different names in different places, but the idea is that any group of people engaged in a common enterprise, that's one of the common definitions of an organization. You could find others, right? But any group of people engaged in a common enterprise, that's most DAOs, it's most groups of people, frankly, is going to be treated as a general partnership unless they've elected appropriately otherwise. And what that means is, almost any jurisdiction can claim jurisdiction over you. This is what California has done already in multiple court cases, where they've said in their findings, the judge says, because you don't have a legal entity that you've chosen anywhere, we are going to treat you as a general partnership in California, which means, by the way, that every single member of the DAO is completely liable for the actions of the DAO. And so now you can have one person held responsible. They can lose their house. They can lose their car, right? Literally, you are personally held responsible for the actions of that DAO. And whether that DAO is getting in trouble for breaking securities rules, or losing people's money, or fraud, or just an accidental issue that came up, you're going to be held individually liable. And that's the biggest thing. Same with tax liability. And I'll leave it at that for now, for why legal entities are important, is that without one, you're definitely going to get the treatment where the government says, well, okay, because this DAO doesn't have its own legal form, we're going to treat it as if you're all, basically that DAO's earnings fall onto you members as individuals. And so that's what a lot of DAOs are looking to be able to avoid. So this is just kind of a basic slide that shows what's the concept of a legal entity for any group of people, is to provide them with a corporate veil. And that corporate veil not only acts as the mechanism by which the DAO can now, or group can now, enter into contracts, open bank accounts, buy property, own property, stuff like that. That's also that protective layer that protects you as individuals from unlimited liability. So just to talk a little bit about jurisdiction and legal entity types, there are so many legal entity types, right? And all the things on this slide are not even necessarily on the same dimension. For example, a corporation can be nonprofit or for-profit, and actually there's many different statuses within those two definitions. A nonprofit doesn't always mean the same thing. The DUNA, which we'll talk a little bit about, is a nonprofit that pays taxes as if it's a for-profit. And so I've certainly wondered, well, why are we even calling it a nonprofit? It's a separate issue. You have all kinds of different legal entities, and you'll hear about some of them on the call today, and jurisdictions too, right? And so you have the jurisdictions that have always been most popular in crypto, which Ramona and Paolo will speak to a bit. Cayman Islands, also BVI, Switzerland, often Delaware is involved. And then now you have increasingly jurisdictions with DAO-specific laws and or other legal frameworks. And so you have Wyoming leading the charge in the United States, and you also have the Marshall Islands, which is, again, where I've done my work, and soon, hopefully, other jurisdictions. I heard that Japan may have finally passed a DAO law. I need to look into the specifics. A lot of countries have talked about it. So I think it is coming soon in many countries in the world, even where it doesn't exist today. And then we'll talk a little bit about these U.S. entities, the DUNA and the cooperative as well. So just a couple more slides on kind of how you use the legal entity. So what we see most commonly, first of all, is something that is, I think, unique to crypto, which is that you have this protocol that is separate from the legal entity that can also hold money and transact with members, with token holders, with users. And so think about Uniswap's like market making contracts, the actual Uniswap DApp contracts are not part of Uniswap Labs or the Uniswap Foundation. They are independent legal entity lists, software running on the blockchain. Yes, the legal entities are involved. They write the software or they fund it, they market it, they might build a front end for it. But there is this concept of the separation between the protocol and the legal entity and the people. And then often what we also see is some combination of for example, whether it's, I have MIDAO on the slide, but it could be a Cayman Foundation at the top, and then some kind of traditional legal entity on the right side, like a DevCo or OpCo, et cetera. I have this slide, which look, it's a marketing slide for MIDAO. The point of the slide is to show all the check marks on the right side. You can find other ways of slicing and dicing the data so that, all the check marks would show up for Cayman or Wyoming or wherever. But the reason I want to show this slide, aside from just, sharing what we like about the work we've done in the Marshall Islands, is if you just look down the left side, all the things you might want to think about that you may have different treatment depending on what jurisdiction you're in. Right? Do you care about a DAO specific law? Are you interested in reducing U.S. legal nexus or not? Right? Maybe you want to be in the U.S., in which case you get a check mark for Wyoming and Delaware. Do you need a tax-free nonprofit option? Is that a key objective for looking for a legal entity? Do you need to wrap the entire DAO? So do you want all of your token holders to be members of the company, or do you not need that? And maybe it's okay to just have a 1 or 5 person foundation that are actually the members of the company. Do you need anonymous membership? What are your cost requirements? Are you going to be launching a token? Is there a token involved in the ecosystem? In what way? And how do the laws of those of whatever jurisdiction possibly apply? And then maybe you're looking for things like a UN blacklists or maybe tax watch list, things like that. So, I talk about the Marshall Islands entity a lot. We originally were going to have a panelist from Wyoming. So I want to touch on the DUNA, which is a law that goes live around this week. It may have been last week, maybe next week. It's a new legal entity made by the Andreessen Horowitz or A16Z lawyers who wrote the laws, and can be very compelling. The way I've heard them describe it, and I think it's valid, is that it's almost an entity when you don't want to have an organization. So like if there's a protocol that needs to be governed and you want it to be able to pay taxes, again, as a for-profit, and you want to have a liability shield, but you're not really trying to create an organization, right? You just want the protocol to live, right? That can be a good fit for the DUNA. We'll see if maybe Ramona has some further thoughts on that during her talk. And then again, I think for me, the Marshall Islands DAO LLC, my pride and joy, because we wrote the laws, I think is good when you do want to have an organization for your DAO and you want people to be members. Just briefly, because I'm about at my 15 minutes here, and I want to save a little more time for this, but a legal entity will have legal governing documents like bylaws, operating agreements. Often that is where you will say, hey, a traditional operating agreement for a company might say governance is done in meetings that must be called 14 days in advance. And then there has to be a virtual option. And then this is the quorum. Well, the same document will exist for a DAO, but it will say that governance is done on the blockchain in this smart contract, right? Or it will say that this token is used to track membership, and by holding the token, you're a member. And so these documents are also important if you don't have a legal entity, right? It can be really, really important to state who are the members, even if it's tracked by a token. Say that those are the members of the organization, so that one day if you end up in a dispute, you have something to look back on and say, look, that's how we agreed we'd make decisions. But especially with a legal entity. And then how do these connect to actions taken by the organization? So are you giving, people the right to be signatories? Are you requiring your members to do KYC or not? Right? These are the kinds of things that you may want to put into your governing documents. So let me just say thank you. If you want to scan these codes, it's a wrong thank you slide from a different talk, but you can find my LinkedIn on the right if you want it. And let me stop there and just maybe a time for one question if there is one. And then otherwise, I'll turn it over to Ramona to go next. All right. Seeing no questions, why don't I turn it over to Ramona? I'll give you a reminder when we're approaching 15 minutes too, if we get there. And then we'll go. By the way, a couple of us may have to run right at the top of the hour, but I know Paolo, who's going last, I think at least can stay a little bit over if necessary. So Ramona, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Adam. Actually, before I start, maybe it's worth, because you mentioned the Wyoming DAO LLC, so it will come into force at the 1st of July. In LexDAO, we did have a study group, which was moderated by Paolo, in which I also attended with the guys from A16Z, and then talking about the Wyoming DAO and like what are some of the issues. I do believe it's a step in the right direction. Certainly, I'm like very keen to see what projects are going there. I know that A16Z has signaled that they would sort of encourage the projects they're sponsoring to move in that direction. The intent behind the Wyoming DAO is actually to help shield the U.S. developers that currently have very, very little to shield them. It doesn't so much solve the securities laws issues or any tax issues, but it does shield them. Like hopefully it will work as intended, right? It's like one thing I would start with, and I would start my presentation with, is that these DAO sort of legal structures, legal constellations, whatever you want to call them, are still very experimental, very developing. It's very early stages, and most lawyers are adapting traditional legal structures to the new paradigm where DAOs are decentralized and where DAOs are intended to function as open systems. I think the reality is that the legal structures have evolved over time, and it's not so long ago that we created the LLC, for example, in the US, and then that took off everywhere, and then everybody started using it. So like experiments at the legal structures level can move very fast, and that they can spread very fast. But the challenge with the DAOs is that we are confronted with a paradigm where these new structures have to be cross-border for all intents and purposes. So this is why offshore jurisdictions like the Cayman Islands have actually are a step up in that direction, because they do provide this absence of nexus with any traditional jurisdiction which may want to tax an international project, right? It's like, hey, actually, if my developers come from 5 different countries, why should I pick one country to be taxed in, right? If the value of the project is developed worldwide, why should one country benefit from it? And I think we're going to see many more discussions in terms of global tax and like global frameworks and global entities in the near future, which may actually solve the problem for DAOs. But right now we work with what we have, and what we have is like foundation company structure in the Cayman Islands. We have foundation company in Switzerland, and I'm looking forward. I'll be going to the Winterthur DAO workshop, actually, where we actually will go deeper into what Switzerland is doing in terms of DAOs. If I can share, let me see if I can share my Drive tab. Okay. Perfect. So Cayman Foundation companies. So why are they being used? Right. It's a sophisticated and stable jurisdiction that's attractive to a lot of the investors. So the reality is that a lot of the people are comfortable with the Cayman Islands in a way where they would not be comfortable with a new jurisdiction or a new legal entity. Right. And they rely on the service providers that already exist here and service traditional capital markets, traditional financial markets, investment funds, and so forth. And I do understand that for most people in DAO, these are part of the old paradigm and something to sort of be very cautious around. And I do see a trend where these DAO legal wrappers that are Cayman Foundation companies are starting to be institutionalized a little bit and try to put people in a certain box. But at this point in time, I still do believe that they offer serious advantages, and then it's some of the best solutions that we can have in this space. We'll see how things develop, right? So in terms of the history of this structure, the Cayman Islands Foundation Company was introduced in 2017, but it had nothing to do with crypto whatsoever. Actually, if I can share some statistics, so October 2017, foundation companies are introduced in the Cayman Islands. They start to be incorporated. It was actually introduced as an alternative to trust structures for people who didn't like to have to deal with trustees, but they wanted to manage their wealth as a separate, like have a segregated container with separate assets and liabilities for purposes of allocating these assets towards a specific purpose, whether it was family succession plans, wealth management, whatever it was. And then for MakerDAO, one lawyer in the Cayman Islands wait a minute, we could use this structure, and they deployed it for MakerDAO. MakerDAO later dissolved it and sort of went fully decentralized. It's we don't want the legal wrapper anymore, but essentially it started to spread as a model. So in March 2020, we had 151 foundation companies being used for this. In July 2022, we had 335. And then in June 2024, I did a presentation as part of the LexDAO legal clinic on this recently. So I pulled the statistics, and we had 719. Most of these foundation companies are DAO related, right? Legal wrappers. So the original purpose was family succession, protection of assets will go faster. And then what this is about, what is this foundation company structure? So it's not really a foundation in the sense of a nonprofit. It's a pure commercial entity that can have its corporate governance and its objects set in stone, including to have a charitable purpose or a nonprofit purpose. And it cannot distribute dividends to its members, even if it had members, right? So it's intended from the beginning to be highly customizable, highly set in stone from the beginning, because the intent was that someone would be a founder and they would set the terms for how the assets were going to be managed going forward for whatever beneficiaries they appointed, right? Is whether family members in the future or anyone else. So it's limited liability, separate legal personality. It does have a board of directors, so we cannot say that we're like the Marshall Islands DAO LLC, fully no people involved. We do have a board of directors. This greatly reassures a lot of the institutional actors, investors, banks, institutions, because we have people who can be held accountable, right? That have duties towards the foundation company, and there are some rules of the game to be respected, right? It's most of these projects would go with professional directors, standalone independent directors, but we do need them. So there are other checks and balances in place. For example, a foundation company in the Cayman Islands has to have a secretary. The secretary is a regulated entity. It's one that is able to provide company management services, so it needs to be regulated. It has certain obligations and so forth. We have other safeguards in terms of foundation company in the Cayman Islands cannot accept an asset contribution unless the secretary doesn't object on the Proceeds of Crime Act. So essentially, this reassures people that these entities are not going to be used by for nefarious purposes, and they are to be trusted. And we have been steadily working to get them more acceptable in terms of, interacting with banks or other key actors. So the key actors here is like founders, the person establishing the foundation company. We don't have to have a founder. Most DAO legal wrappers do not have a founder. The secretary is an important piece, and it's mandatory. So again, it's someone who is licensed locally to provide this kind of services, and therefore they are subject to certain obligations. A supervisor is someone we need to have if the foundation is an orphan structure without members that can vote and without beneficial owners. We need someone to be able to maintain those functions, but it can be a professional supervisor, it can be a director. And we can greatly restrict or balance its powers with the board of directors to create a very balanced structure. So this is also a possibility. Members, we can have members or we can go without members. Frankly, a DAO legal wrapper could use a foundation company with members if the members were okay with being doxed, right? If not, they would need to be sort of category of beneficiaries as the token holders, as the project, right? We have interested persons, members, supervisors, or other party who have a right to bring an action on behalf of the foundation company. So again, this ties into how do we link this entity, this type of entity, to the existing legal system to be able to function in the legal world, to be able to go to court, to be able to act, right, on behalf of the project. And then beneficiaries, again, this is why DAOs have used Cayman Foundation companies as legal wrappers, because we can designate token holders generally as beneficiaries without having to KYC them. We can designate the project, the ecosystem, the protocol as a beneficiary, or the objects of the foundation company can be drafted so carefully so that we know that the funds will be deployed and allocated in a certain way. And then again, beneficiaries are not beneficial owners. We don't dox them. We don't have to say who they are. They don't need to be appointed at the beginning. So this is, again, one of the key attraction factors. And then on the board of directors, again, we do have to have directors, but the benefit of having directors, which I think that a lot of people will come to appreciate at one point, is that we do have director fiduciary duties. And if DAOs are using professional independent directors, then, like, again, there's no risk that the director will try to take over the project, or there will be a conflict between the promoters or the members of the DAOs. No, these would be people who would be doing like things professionally, just making sure that the objects of the foundation companies are respected, and then that the voting mechanism as the DAOs, like, there's not a takeover, or there's not a hack, or if you have suddenly a situation where the DAO vote says that we have to buy rubber ducks for all the money, we won't actually like that, right? So again, the flexibility, the same flexibility we have for the foundation company in terms of corporate governance carries over to the resolution of the disputes. We can include the mechanism that were built into the smart contracts, or the DAO consensus mechanism. That's totally possible and allowed. But we also have the Grand Court of the Cayman Islands as a safety net. And then if there is a blockage or a problem that we cannot solve, we will have a recourse, right? So essentially, this is the very gist of, very, very briefly, the gist of the foundation companies in the Cayman Islands. I will talk about Prospera as well, because Prospera is more experiment. So Cayman Islands, we've seen traditional sort of offshore jurisdiction, quite a good reputation in some circles, not everywhere. I think that Europeans are still very mindful of offshore Cayman Islands and BVI. It works really well with the British Virgin Islands for token issuances. So there's so-called Cayman sandwich structure, where you have the foundation company on top, and then you have one or two entities in the British Virgin Islands that are dealing with token issuances. But we're starting to look now at more innovative approaches. And one of the more innovative approaches is a special economic zone in Honduras, which is called Prospera, where we are set up with Ixian, actually, that allows us to experiment even more, and allows us to experiment with legal structures, and allows us to experiment with legal regimes. The principle is that of polycentric law, in terms of one project is allowed to choose what what law they wish to apply, what standards they wish to respect, what standards they wish to apply. You could choose like France or California or whatever, Wyoming, and then it works in terms of there is a mechanism of insurance and arbitration that kick in to make sure that the projects do not undergo super high risk, because like they have a very pragmatic experimental sandbox to work on. Essentially, my goal at this point is to tie them closer together in terms of like Prospera can be the experimental, the laboratory for all the corporate governance experiments that we'd like to have for foundation company structures, and then we can benefit from Cayman Foundation. But I'm very much aware that Canada is working on a foundation company or DAO type structure law. Japan, like Adam, like you mentioned Japan, there is Dubai, there is other jurisdictions, and there's a lot of innovation in the space. So I'm hopeful that by the end of this year, you'll have much more. Do I still have time, or like you haven't cut me off or anything? Because I've been speaking very quickly. If I could just have more, like a few more minutes to talk about the risk management aspect, because this is something I've been very focused on. So the risk management aspect, so coming from being dragged on a few boards and then coming from a perspective of like, oh my God, what do I do? These are sort of, there's nothing underneath, like none of the usual checks and balances that people are used to. So I try to take an approach as like, okay, what are the good practices that we have developed over the years for big corporations, listed companies in intent, right? Is like whether they're applied or not, we did have these advancements in terms of thinking and what would be good risk management and good corporate governance. If we can find a way to actually embed them in the DAO tooling so that they would be automatically implemented, we'll have a beautiful product that can be then re-exported to traditional organizations to make them more resilient and more robust, right? So this was my main goal for doing this research on risk management. And what I discovered by doing the research in risk management is that DAOs have a set of very specific risks that traditional organizations do not have, especially participant risk, right? Participant risk is something that doesn't exist in traditional organization because we do have the evolution of the legal systems over a period of time that protects the right of the employees, of the agents, of the contractors. There's lots of protections in there, not so much protections for DAO participants, right? Whereas we have to be very mindful of that when we advise a DAO project where we participate or we engage as a core contributor in a DAO. Is like, okay, how do I attract good people? So first of all, there's an emergence tracking issues, like how can I make sure that I have the pipeline and the guidance so that people don't have to invest an overwhelming amount of time just to see if a DAO is a good fit for them, right? It's like, how do I get there? And then second, how do I attract good people in the sense that they're going to take, if they're very active, they're going to take more risks. So there is a disincentive for them to be very active in the DAO, because if they are very active, they're taking more risk than usual. So again, this is something that needs to be addressed in correlation with the legal work, with the legal wrappers, because this is a very, very key area of focus. I do have a risk management presentation as part of R&DAO, and I see Alex, hello, next week. So if you guys want to hear more about risk management in DAO, please join us for the Opus Collective presentation, and this is my part of the presentation ended. And if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Cool. Yeah, similar to me, maybe if there's one question anyone has, we could take it now. And seeing none, thank you, Ramona. We're going to turn it over to Paolo. I know I will have to drop during your talk, so I'm sorry I won't be here for the end. I have to go to another session. I'm not sure if Ramona will be doing the same, but please bring us home, Paolo, and feel free to take Q&A at the end, and Peth will help you transition when you're finished.
Okay, thank you.
I'll stick around.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone. So I will start with because I mean we had these two great panelists, Adam and Ramona. So they said a lot of interesting things. So let me say something a little bit, just a story that happened to me as a lawyer. I was mentioning that in my presentation, introducing myself, that I manage a case of litigation about DAO. That was a very interesting case, and I think can say a lot of things about DAOs and decentralized organization. Basically, I was acting as lawyer for three projects of fungible tokens. and I will not give the name, of course, for because everything is still confidential, although it's been settled. But basically, these three projects of fungible tokens, they were my clients. They locked their tokens in a locker company. So basically, one of those companies that provides locking services for ERC20 tokens generated by smart contract. Now, for a number of reasons, the smart contract of this locking company was hacked, and was clear without any kind of dispute that this locking company was responsible, because the smart contract had been audited like some weeks before, and the auditing company found some weaknesses, some very clear weaknesses in this smart contract. And so I wrote on behalf of these three clients of mine to the counterparty, which was a traditional company. And so we started an out-of-court settlement. And it was interesting that this out-of-court settlement, which lasted for more than 1 year, really, and we exchanged a lot of emails, back and forth, was not about their responsibility, because that was kind of clear. There was nothing to say about that. So what we really debated for a lot of time was, because these clients were decentralized, no entity, no legal entity, purely decentralized, and one of them also relinquished the key of the smart contract. So the lawyer counterparty, which was a big law firm, started asking me, who gave you the mandate? Who gave you the mandate? Because it's a centralized project. Who gave you the mandate? How can you claim to be the lawyer of these people? And then was asking stuff like, if we pay the people that you say are your clients, how can we be sure that someone else will pop in at some point and asking for another compensation? So and we found a lot of interesting solution, creative solutions. So after more than 1 year, we finally found this settlement. But the entire negotiation, back and forth, was about this stuff. And I think this is interesting because this company was working 100% in crypto. The counterparty, I mean, was working 100% in crypto. All the clients of this counterparty were decentralized projects, basically, probably 99%. But they didn't have any problem in raising the fact that my clients were decentralized projects. So, of course, this was a little bit unethical from my point of view. But legally speaking, I can understand that their lawyer raised this argument. So the point is, we can all be within this crypto decentralized space. We can always be like very much all this space, but let's just be aware that someone at some point can raise that this problem of being decentralized. This is what is the first consideration, the first point that I wanted to share with you. Another one is I wanted to say something and that is linked to what Ramona was saying, that was very interesting about risk management for DAO. And in my opinion, what really also DAOs are a new type of organization. It's something really new, something new for the economy. And a major change, in my personal opinion, from traditional legal companies, limited liability companies, LLC, whatever there are in the various jurisdictions, and DAOs, even DAOs with some legal entities, is that traditionally limited liability companies are really based on the idea of capitals. So you might have someone that at some point put some money or invest some money in a company, then for whatever reason is unable to work in that company, but still holds the shares. Like, for example, one of the partner of Bill Gates, if I'm not wrong, Steve Ballmer, was one of the founder of Microsoft, and then had some very serious illness problems, so stopped working basically on Microsoft. But he's still a multi-billionaire because he still had the shares from the beginning. These type of situations, in my opinion, are not really present in DAOs, because basically, regardless of the legal structure of DAOs, it's, at least in my experience, it's true that people in DAOs are active, get money, get profits, get remuneration as far as they can work into the DAO. So basically, in this decentralized organization, there is we got back this idea of that the participation, the control, the reputation, the profits also that persons get from the DAO, from this organization, is very much linked to the work, to being present. So, and this is, in my opinion, is a very major change from the traditional capital companies that we all know. I mean, people, I think, of our generation, a bit younger, a bit older, we all grew up with this idea of companies. You get the shares regardless of what you do, and then and you get the profits. This is not true anymore in DAO. Then this said, giving a little bit of speaking a little bit about DAOs in Europe and in Switzerland, and I'm not a Swiss lawyer, so I was telling Adam, okay, I will tell something about Switzerland, but I'm not really qualified about telling something about that. So I will try to say something just. In relation to Europe, I don't think that the European Union framework gives really a lot of space for DAO. I mean, we have now in Europe this MiCA legislation, which is about which is going into force depending on which part of MiCA in this period, more or less. And there is in MiCA there is one rule which is really recital 22. It's about decentralized providers. So if they are really decentralized, they are exempted from the regulatory activity of MiCA. But there is no so much clarity about what it really means to be totally decentralized. Apart from that, there is not so much. There are not so much reference into Europe. Now, given the fact that the UK is not part anymore of Europe, basically Europe is the European Union is basically continental Europe. And in continental Europe, in my personal opinion, the civil law is even less friendly with the idea of decentralized organization than common law, probably. So I don't see a lot of spaces in Europe for in the European Union, at least, for decentralized using a local legal structure. I mean, it's still possible. I know, for example, in my countries, a couple of DAOs, very local, that they use traditional associations for doing a DAO. So it's possible. It's absolutely possible. But the local legislation is not so much friendly, in my opinion, like, for example, the kind of legislation that Adam in Marshall Island was referring, or in Cayman Island, is a little bit less. For Switzerland, as far as I know, is a little bit an offshore jurisdiction as well, within although it's in the heart of Europe. Well, it's a traditional offshore country in Europe, and as far as I know, they embrace the idea of creating foundation for. So let me finish, Alex, and I'll give you. They embrace the idea of attracting projects, because, of course, the wealth management is the first industry in Switzerland. So they saw this opportunity, but as far as I understand, it's a bit less about this creating legal entities for decentralized organization, more about creating legal entities for managing token, like assets, like digital assets, like assets. So I think that the Swiss Foundation can be used for, and have been used for managing this asset, the digital asset, this token, because the Swiss people have a long legal tradition for this kind of stuff. Alex, do you have a question? Yes.
Yes, sorry for interrupting. I don't know if I have all the context of the conversation, but I have like a line of thought that could be different and maybe complementary. So I was actually coming from another session which was focusing legal framework for cooperatives, and I suddenly thought like the answer is not there. Maybe it's here in the DAO model, but I keep coming back to the same idea of the problem is trying to apply the DAO model into the geographical sphere because it's incompatible. And one line of thought that I think it's interesting and I would love to hear your opinions is what would happen if we divided the idea of the what a business or a company or a corporation association is into the rights, the labor rights and the benefits and the social security for the people, and we keep that as a local thing. So you have incorporation of people depending on where they are, independently on what type of work or project they are involved, and you keep that as a global, let's say, more abstract thing. So you could have like a federation of legal figures that could even permit people to migrate from one jurisdiction to another. But the income they would receive would not be attached to that figure, but it would be more like as if they were lending a service to the DAO, but the figure would be representing them. I don't know if I am explaining.
Ramona, do you want to answer? I have my answer, but if you want to answer,
Go ahead, and then I will add. It's like I do have an answer. I'm not sure I have your answer. So yeah, let's both chime in.
Okay. Well, in my opinion, let me say the first that I think that I mean there are, of course, it's very much complicated, but I think that probably the best solution for DAOs is not one legal entity, but it's trying to create a system. So with different pieces here and there, and even in different jurisdictions. Now, how and where, this depends still on case by case. In relation to the idea of the social cooperative, I know that there is this recurring idea in crypto. I cannot remember now the name, but I had one. I participated one in a panel with a U.S. lawyer that wrote an article about this, which circulated a lot about this idea of using cooperative for DAOs, basically. I personally am not so much sure about that, and maybe I draw my my answer based on the experience, my personal experience of what is a cooperative in my country. More or less the same idea, I think, around across different countries. But at least in my country is one person, one vote cooperative with no real capital. So like limited liability company, but with no capital, and it's like one person, one vote. Yeah,
Sorry.
please.
Okay, so if I wanted to add on that, Paolo, is that yes, so like right now, because of the fragmentation of legal systems, we will need to focus on a case-by-case basis for each project. It's like, where are most of your members? What are your actual needs in terms of like tying them with local rules and like where they are living? And the solution may be, Alex, to create several legal entities that are linked to, like, between them with contracts, with smart contracts, so that they can provide a security for the people on the ground versus, interactions and evening out. I also wanted to say that cooperatives can be developed and built upon because they're really, really good structures for a lot of things. In many countries, they are restricted in terms of what they can do, right? In many countries, they're only allowed to be credit unions or constructive cooperatives or food or something like that. The International Cooperative Alliance is actually reportedly involving like about 12% of GDP. So that's quite an important. And I do think that there is a very much an interest in linking, and like the both of us have talked about this already, in terms of linking DAOs to cooperatives and then building the tooling that cooperatives can use, and then maybe using those legal structures. But again, legislative change will be needed in certain countries to be able to do this. So the reason for this problem is actually that our legal systems are so fragmented that we cannot really build the same thing for everybody. And this is why I'm in Prospera with Ixian, in terms of like, if we can build a legal operating system that would be good enough on an international standards level, then people can adopt it and it will become soft law, right? Law doesn't actually need to be country issued, right? It's like it's consensus, it's buy-in. So we have soft law as well as hard law, right? And as long as we have soft law spreading and working and used by people, we can weigh in on the regulator side in various countries and work with the regulators in various countries to actually implement it and make it more consistent with the local rules. So this is one approach which DAOs could adopt and which can work, albeit it's a lot of work. It's like there's a lot to be done, right?
One consideration why I think that I would say there is some problem, in my opinion, in using the cooperative, because they've been developed under this idea of going against capital. No, I mean, of course, there is a leftist tradition. Well, that's it. Between behind the cooperative, and as Ramona was saying, the International Cooperative Alliance is really strong. It's really big one. Probably not so much in the Anglo-Saxon world, but in continental Europe, in Latin America, it's really big and strong. But the problem, in my opinion, with the cooperative is that they have been created with this idea that there is no capital. So it's really each member has one vote. Now, DAO do not have, as I was saying at the beginning, a capital structure, but they have tokens. And this idea of tokens is, in my opinion, is a little bit in conflict with the idea of the cooperative, at least the traditional model.
Of course.
This doesn't mean that we can take the cooperative model and evolve into something a little bit different, taking into consideration the token model. But token is something that, in my opinion, has always to be taken into consideration in DAOs. I don't see how you can have a DAO without a token. Probably something which is.
Paolo. So you can use a HAT protocol where actually you can have one member, one vote. So that will also count as a DAO, except that, of course, the incentives, the economic incentives would need to be separated from the token, like from the vote, right? It's like you have one member on vote, but the economic benefits could be proportionate with the investment of time and effort.
Yeah, okay, I agree. But I was saying that the cooperative, the way it is, it cannot be taken for DAO. It can be used as something which can give inspiration for something new, but I don't see it simply using the cooperative model. And coming back to Duna, because that made me think about.
I need to leave. I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
happy to see the recording and everything.
Okay, bye,
Thank
Alex.
you very much for the answers.
Yeah, bye. Coming back to Duna, and we participated, Ramona, in that panel that I was moderating, and I couldn't speak for obvious reason. At least not my opinion on Duna, which I can say now. I think that the biggest problem with Duna is that a Duna, or a DAO, which is incorporated as a Duna, if issues a token, the token will still go under the SEC. which is a federal agency. That's something which the A16Z people in their article that everyone can read in the A16Z website, they touch this point.
But it will be very interesting because Wyoming Duna is an unincorporated one, right? So like security is being issued by an unincorporated thing. It's going to be a very interesting proposition there. But yes.
But yeah, but in terms of risk for the individuals, doesn't solve. I mean, they say they kind of go around in that article trying to say that basically if you issue a token as a DAO under a Duna model, you are still protected as the natural person. In my opinion, I'm not
open from the DAO, right? You can actually sort that and then separate that, because they were also saying that you can be a token holder without being a Wyoming Duna member, which I didn't quite understand, but apparently their intent is to separate the tokens from the membership. And I see Nick has a question also.
Yeah. So can you hear me? Okay. So my question is along the same lines of Alex. So if you have, I guess, different levels of members, so you have your like core contributors and then kind of scale downwards to like basic participants, is there any like legal applicability for cooperatives that like you can differentiate between those? And because I know there's like quadratic voting, so I feel like that is an important aspect to make it so that those that have more significant voting power don't kind of overwhelm the decision-making process. So is there any legal applicability to that type of concept? Or I guess what legal applicability is there in terms of co-op?
Just to,
I see that you have the answer. So. Yeah, please.
Sorry, we have a bit of an overlay here. So like from my perspective, like the limits that what we could do with cooperative come from where they are incorporated and what are the restrictions on their way of working, and then we need to build that in. It's very much the same with all types of companies, right? You can do some legal structures are more flexible than others, and some will have certain rules. But I do believe that we will need to get past this. It's like legal structures are artifacts that we built, and we can build new artifacts and new legal structures. It will take some time and it will take some thinking, but I am confident that like with experiments and then moving incrementally with the Wyoming Duna and then the Swiss work and then Japan, what Japan is doing is like we can actually gradually move towards legal structures which are better fit for how DAOs actually work, and then the variety of the voting mechanism that can happen or the incentive mechanism that can happen, right? So right now, cooperatives have their own limits, right, in terms of what you can do, but it doesn't mean that they're not useful, because actually there are the legal structures that are the closest to DAOs and how DAOs are supposed to be working. And also they have this huge history, a few hundreds of years of history of disputes and like how do we resolve them, and then like human issues, because we need to understand that like so there's this distinction that happens between automated sort of fully decentralized DAOs that work on a protocol, and then it's like everything happens automatically, and those could be a good fit for Wyoming Dunas. But we also have lots of projects which are really participatory DAOs, which are really groups of people around the common objects and mission, and those human problems have been solved before in lots of places. So it's really sort of integrating all that knowledge and evolving into better legal structures. And sorry, I'm done. Sorry, Paolo.
Paulo.
Sorry. No, I was saying that I basically agree that you can use cooperative, but they're not super flexible in my opinion. At least the model that I know in my country is not a super flexible model, and of course then everything has to be seen on a local level. But still, I would say cooperative are not super flexible, and are also not so much, although there is this international cooperative movement that Ramona was mentioning, which is very international, very powerful, very rich also, I would say. They're very domestic, while limited to a country. I don't know how to say. While, for example, companies are being used in a number of ways in international groups. So there are a lot of jurists or lawyers have found a lot of ways of creating flexible company structure which spread around different countries, different systems. Cooperative are not, are really super limited to a single country. Then there is this big movement, which is more like a political movement, not saying leftist, but just a political movement of putting together all this cooperative. But you don't really find the level of international legal entities or legal entities spread around different countries that you can find with corporate groups, really. So I don't think that, I think that the cooperative model can offer many hints for the decentralized organization, but cannot be taken the way it is and used. That's my opinion.
One way people using cooperatives or starting to use cooperatives is that cooperatives are allowing them to fall outside the securities laws in the US. So if there is a US based project, cooperative can really be a good form for them to actually go to market, because we do have securities paralysis in terms of projects that are unable to go to market because it's like, oh my God, what am I allowed to do? Versus if you get into a legal structure that actually exists and you are able to go to market, it's imperfect. It's not how it's going to look eventually, but it'll get you closer to existing and building and growing, right? So there are trades, there are trades to be made, there are trade-offs. One thing I would say, come to LexDAO, and like we're having study groups. Paolo is leading our study groups, and we have lots of them. And then I also have office hours in Lex Clinics twice a month on Fridays. Like this is why LexDAO in terms of legal engineering exists, because it's these are problems to be solved, right? It's like law has emerged and it doesn't always fit together. It certainly doesn't fit together country with country, but there's a lot of effort and a lot of thinking into comparing and finding common ground, and then seeing how these structures can be more harmonized, more evolving together, so that we can actually build these structures. So there's a lot of work to be done, but lawyers are not the enemy, right? It's like we're trying to be part of the solution, at least some of us.
Oh, you're muted again. But I think the combination of what you guys were saying is like cooperative structure in itself makes sense, but like when you go more international, then it probably makes more sense to have like a multiple level business structure to account for that in more of a legal sense,
Yes.
but still adhering to like I guess the vision of cooperative,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Okay.
No,
That makes
I was saying that I need to go now. So I will leave, I don't know, Ramona or someone else.
Eventually, I think we're
Yeah, we are already 20 minutes over time, and we only have one listener left. So thank you for staying so long, and thank you for going so deeply. This will be very useful for the playbook as well. Like we'll use this content to expand on the DAO playbook. So yeah, thank you again. This has been great.
Thank you everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.
pleasure.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
And since the recording is still on, and Nick, you are the only remaining person, but that is fine. The recording is still on, so I'm
okay.
going to wrap it up. So the only thing that I have to say is I need to share this link here that I already shared a bunch of times. The link that includes all the links. Why am I horizontal on here? That's weird. Yeah, on my phone it's normal, and my phone is standing vertically, but
Okay,
Hold
yeah, I
on,
would
my
assume that it
computer
was your
is
phone
horizontal.
that was making it that way.
No, like phone is standing vertically and I'm displayed vertically to myself, but on the laptop screen I'm horizontal. Let's just ignore that. But yeah, I shared this link that you probably already seen. And the only other thing is, yeah, reminding people of the DAO Summer Challenge. So for people who will be working on their DAO over the summer, there's the DAO Summer Challenge that is rewarding up to 5K, or I guess more if the OP tokens go up in price. So there's some incentive to continue working besides just wanting to work on it. And that's it. Thank you, everybody, in this huge number for sticking until the very end of this year's DAO Spring. And a special thank you to Nick.
Thank you for hosting and organizing all of it, and getting a lot of great panelists to join.